The title of tonight's session is Why Are My Electric Bills or Energy Bills So High? And this is also the October meeting of the New Hampshire Network. So basically, good evening and welcome to the October meeting of the New Hampshire Network for Climate, Energy, and Environment. My name is Joe Kwasnik. I'm a member of the New Hampshire Network Steering Committee and facilitator of the New Hampshire Network Legislation Work Group. I will be the moderator of tonight's meeting. At this time, I would urge everyone to basically mute their Zoom connection so that we avoid any sounds that are coming from backgrounds, okay? And tonight we will focus on the high costs of energy in the Granite State. As all of you are aware, over the last year or more, New Hampshire consumers have seen a steady rise in energy costs, from the price of gasoline, which peaked early this summer at $5 a gallon, and more, to the cost of number 2 heating oil, with prices last winter of $5 a gallon and similar price increases for natural gas and propane. To add insult to injury, the price of electricity has also jumped in the last 6 months from around 10 cents a kilowatt hour to over 20 cents a kilowatt hour for customers of Unitil. And these prices are just for the cost of electricity and do not include the cost of delivering that electricity to your home, which can in many cases be another 10 cents per kilowatt hour. For the average energy consumer in New Hampshire, especially for low to moderate income consumers, these increases in energy costs are crushing, which will make the winter of 2022-23 a record breaker of out-of-pocket costs for consumers. To help us understand how we got to this situation of high energy costs, we are fortunate to have tonight 2 leading experts in the field of energy in New Hampshire, joining us tonight to shed some light on this question. Hopefully, they will also help us understand what needs to be done to mitigate these costs going forward. Let me now introduce them to you, and I know they are not strangers to you. The first person I'd like to introduce is Sam Evans-Brown. He's the Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire. And Sam leads Clean Energy New Hampshire in its efforts to create a cleaner, more affordable, and more resilient energy economy and system in the Granite State. Sam grew up in the Lakes region of New Hampshire. Prior to joining Clean Energy, he was a podcast host and radio journalist for nearly 10 years, during which he wrote stories about New England energy issues extensively and won several regional awards and national awards. He's an excellent bike mechanic. I got to keep that in the back of my mind. A Spanish speaker and a father of 2. Sam graduated with a BA from Bates College in Politics and Spanish in 2009. And Sam, you make me feel really old. Okay, and the second person we're very fortunate to have with us tonight is Don Kreis. Don's the consumer advocate for the New Hampshire Office of the Consumer Advocate. Don has served since 2016 as New Hampshire's consumer advocate, representing the interests of residential utility customers before the New Hampshire PUC, as well as regional and federal decision-making bodies. He's previously served as general counsel of the New Hampshire PUC, as a hearing officer for the Vermont Public Utilities Commission, and as assistant director of the Institute of Energy and the Environment at Vermont Law School. As a result of his career in utility regulation, Don has expertise in applying cost of service principles to the determination of just and reasonable prices for essential public services. And Don, that's a cost of service is something that is near and dear to the heart of utility rate makers. An attorney, Don has served judicial clerkships with the Maine Supreme Judicial Court, the U.S. District Court for the District of Maine, and the Vermont Supreme Court. As a father of a young adult with cystic fibrosis, Don is active in the Northern New England chapter of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and has, of necessity, become an autodidact with respect to issues related to healthcare policy, genetics, microbiology, pulmonology, and drug pricing. Prior to law school, Don spent a decade as a full-time journalist, first with the AP and then with the alternative newsleaker Maine Times. Don received his bachelor's degree from Middlebury College, holds a master's degree from the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, and earned his JD from the University of Maine School of Law. Welcome, Don. It's good to have you with us tonight.
You forgot to mention that I was born on a small island off the coast of North America.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Is that called Manhattan and Long Island?
Exactly.
Okay. Glad to hear that. Tonight's discussion will start with each speaker providing their perspective on this challenge to our state, followed by a Q&A session for the audience to ask questions. I will start the Q&A with one question and then look to all of you to pose additional questions. Please jot down your questions on the chat, and then either Susan or Donna will call on questioners to verbalize their questions. We'll end this meeting with a 5-minute wrap-up by our speakers and end promptly at 6:30. And as that famous television personality used to say, now on with the shoe. We'll start first with Sam. Sam, would you like to give us your unique perspective on what we're now experiencing in New Hampshire on energy costs?
I suppose I could. I was texting furiously with Don on my way here because we had, as is par for the course when you have 2 kids, and my wife has a meeting currently.
We
were.
Yeah, but you don't want to be talking right now.
Participants should probably mute themselves. So Alfred, you're speaking into the. There you go. Great. All right. So I will share. No, I won't. I brought some slides. I always bring slides. Joe, do you think I could share them?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
It says I'm disabled.
Could someone make him a host?
Just let me know.
We're working on it.
Okay.
I think Reinmar has to do that, and I don't see his.
No, I'm
video
good
right now.
Okay, give me 2 seconds to pull this up. Great. Okay. So I put together some slides because, as Don knows, I can't think and present cogently without slides in front of me to keep me on track and keep me from rambling incoherently. And I really do appreciate the chance to spend some time thinking and talking about this question, because I genuinely do believe that if we were to have asked ourselves the question of how do you lower electricity rates in 2022, and we had asked ourselves that question in 2000 or 2010, we probably would have gotten the wrong answer. And in fact, I think that's what got us where we are now. So I guess it's fun to go first because whatever Don was going to say, I get to steal his thunder in case we're talking about the same points. But I thought I'd just provide a bit of context about New Hampshire's energy markets and how we got where we are. So Clean Energy New Hampshire, for those who don't know, we're a 501c3. We're supported by members like you. I know that many of you are in fact members. I hope that all of you would consider becoming members and supporting our work. There's much more to say about that, but you can just sort of check us out online if you're curious what membership means. Depending on what type of entity you are, whether you represent a local energy committee or perhaps you have a business that is in the clean energy economy that you think would be well represented by us, or whether you're just an individual who supports what we do. Those are the 3 types of members that we have. But enough for my own self-promotion. This is data that Chris Skoglund, who's on my staff, pulls together. In fact, he's pulled it together sort of as a rebuttal to some data that's out there. When you look at generation and emissions according to state geographic and political boundaries, New Hampshire actually looks very good in terms of how our greenhouse gas emissions have declined over the past 10 and 20 years. And that's largely because all of most of the oil and coal generating units have stopped producing in New Hampshire over the course of the last 2 decades, and the ones that remain have transitioned from being baseload units to being sort of peaker units. So Merrimack Station in Bow, as I'm sure many of you know, has gone from being upwards 50% or more capacity factor, which means running at least half the time, to a place where in certain years it has dipped below 10% capacity factor. It really is just running on the highest demand times of year. And so if you look at just what's being generated within the state boundaries, it looks like our emissions have declined dramatically. But there's another way of looking at that exact same question, which is what is the carbon profile of what our utilities purchase. And so that's what this data shows. And it's worth noting that our utilities essentially purchase the grid mix. It's what is fueling. If you're on default service, what's fueling your electric bill is essentially whatever the grid provides, which means that there hasn't been a ton of emissions decline in the region. In the state in terms of what you're responsible for as an individual emitter. But that's not to say that things have not changed, right? So if folks are not familiar with this is a slide that ISO New England sort of trots out whenever they go on their roadshow to show how we got where we are today. If you were not aware, electricity market deregulation happened essentially at the beginning of this graph, where the monopoly regulated utilities were told to start selling their power plants, and the control of the decision of whether or not to run an individual generator was delegated to sort of a market structure, which was administered by ISO New England. And as that new structure took hold, market actors saw a tremendous opportunity to come in and build natural gas-fired power plants, hoping to be able to undercut the existing generators in the system. And they came in en masse. They came in incredible quantities. I mean, you'll see on the right-hand side of the graph what we're talking about here. It's over 10,000 megawatts of natural gas-fired generation was built over the course of the last 20 years. That generation was built on the back of a natural gas pipeline network that was not designed for natural gas-fired power plants. It was designed for heating load. And so these generators parked themselves more or less opportunistically along the existing natural gas transmission network. And essentially the idea was most of the year, these pipelines are not in use because most of the year they're nowhere near capacity because there's not a ton of natural gas fired furnaces that are burning to keep houses warm. And so these generators were essentially, they're sort of filling in, they were skimming from a network that was built already that they didn't need to pay into. As more and more of them came online, that has led to issues of constraint. The question is really what do we do about that issue of constraint? But just to take a step back before we get to that question of what do we do, it's really important to understand how the markets work and why this is leading to the price situation in which we're in. So if you haven't tuned into the ISO New England market structure, it's based on what are called marginal prices. And the way the marginal price auctions function is that everyone bids into the market on a sort of there are day ahead markets and there are real time markets, and they bid in their cost of generation. And you can have units that bid in, that are called price takers. So nuclear, hydro, renewable energy facilities tend to be price takers. They tend to bid in at $0 because they have zero cost of fuel. So they want to run as much as possible. And so price takers are usually at the bottom of what's called the big bid stack. Those would be the A type resources on this graph. And then you move up to more and more and more costly resources. And the ISO essentially asks how much demand do we need at any given moment, and that's the y-axis on this graph. So that's the x-axis on this graph. So they go down the x-axis until they reach the number of megawatts that they need at that moment, and whoever is at that point, that demand that's required is what's called the price setter, and everyone in the market gets paid that price. This is relevant because as we have built more and more and more natural gas, it is more and more frequently the case that natural gas is the price setter in the ISO New England markets. And natural gas, as we know, is an incredibly volatile fuel that suddenly has gotten much, much more expensive. In particular, it's really important to know that it's not just natural gas that is determining a lot of the cost of energy into your bill. It's actually liquefied natural gas. So if you've ever driven down to Boston and you've seen on the left, there's the spot with the wind turbine that you can see off the highway, and you can see these big white tanks as you drive down. That's the Everett terminal. And co-located with that Everett terminal But the Everett terminal, by the way, it's a liquefied natural gas import terminal where they bring in natural gas to sort of backfeed into the pipeline system from abroad, typically from Trinidad and Tobago, sometimes from Russia, which frequently gets nasty headlines whenever that happens. And co-located on that site is a power plant called Mystic. Mystic has tried to close a number of times. They have said we cannot operate with prices being as low as they are. And ISO New England has come to the rescue and essentially said, these units must remain open for reliability purposes, and we will pay whatever it costs. And that's what that cost of service agreement means, is that ISO New England is paying whatever it takes to keep Mystic open. The problem with that is that currently, not only is natural gas quite expensive here in the United States, but globally, natural gas is incredibly expensive. And not only are we seeing that price pressure here locally, because domestic natural gas is now competing on a world market, and natural gas producers are pumping it out to export terminals as fast as they can so that they can try to get access to these global prices that are, 3, 4, 5, 6 times more than what they can get for it here domestically. But also that means that when we look at that cost of service agreement for Mystic, we're paying those global prices in order for us to have this sort of reliability that ISO New England feels that we have to have. Oh, and I put this slide in the wrong place. I was literally furiously adding slides to the slideshow as we were beginning the talk. But here, I'll come back to it in just a second. The cost of that LNG, that global LNG premium. This is from a Portland Press Herald article, which Don, am I correct? Were you a Portsmouth Press Herald, is a Portland Press Herald reporter in your journalism career?
I was not. I worked in the Press Herald building, which is now a hotel, but I was with Associated Press, and the AP Portland Bureau used to be in the Press Herald building. So I knew all the Press Herald people, and my byline has been on the front page of the Press Herald many times, but I was never actually on their payroll. Gotcha.
Sorry for getting that wrong. I was, for some reason, I had in my memory, that's who I transposed your former employer to. They have a wonderful energy reporter who, if you don't follow his work, you absolutely should. And this is from one of his articles. All of us, this is not just true of Mainers, but all of us are paying tens of dollars on every one of our bills just for that LNG premium. And then this slide should have come next. Essentially, I am very skeptical that we are going to start to see lower fossil fuel prices in the very near future. And the reason for that is that if you paid any attention to what it was that was fueling the fracking boom of the sort of 2008 to 2015 time period, it is what Alan Greenspan used to refer to as irrational exuberance. So fracking was a brand new technology, and a lot of companies were enthusiastically selling the idea to investors. They told those investors that they will be able to unlock vast stores of fossil fuels that had been previously inaccessible, and that those investors would make scads and scads of money. All of that, unfortunately, was not true. And in fact, the fracking boom destroyed around $300 billion worth of private capital because the fracking companies were never able to drive down their costs as much as they anticipated they would. And so while they were very successful in raising production levels so high that the price of natural gas absolutely cratered, I think what we're seeing now is that in fact those prices were artificially low and will likely never be that low again because those companies weren't making money. Their expansion was fueled largely from investor speculation. And now, even with these much higher prices that we're seeing in the current market, there is not a response that you might expect. The old saying is the cure for high prices is high prices. And so high prices should lead more drilling, more production. And that's simply not happening because last time we went through this, they lost tons of money. So I would anticipate that we will never see prices as low as the ones we saw in the 2012 to 2018 timeframe again, because the drillers would like to make a little more profit than they made last time around. And so, fossil fuel will likely not come to the rescue. So then this gets to this question of okay, so what do we do about this? We've built this massive network of natural gas-fired power plants, which, by the way, I will share this because it happened years ago, and I think he'd let me. Well, he will have forgotten that he said this, and probably I won't get in trouble for it anymore. I interviewed Gordon Van Whaley, the president of ISO New England years ago. And when he was talking about that massive build out of natural gas fired power plants, he let loose this sort of offhand comment. He said, oh yeah, well, there was all these companies came in and they built these natural gas fired power plants, and most of them lost their shirts. And then after he said, actually, could you please not say that, because could you please not put that on the radio, because some people will get mad at me if I'm seen to be saying that publicly. So similarly with the fracking boom, the boom in natural gas fired power plant construction was not great for merchant generators, frankly, because it also caused prices to crater, and so generators haven't been making as much as they were hoping over the past 20 years either. So anyway, that's just a brief aside. So the question is, what do we do about this? So we have this incredible over-reliance on natural gas-fired power plants. Back several years ago, when the New England Energy Direct or the Northeast Energy Direct, the NED pipeline was being proposed, we had a pitched battle about what should we do about the fact that occasionally in winter, electricity gets very, very expensive. And soon to be governor, but at the time Attorney General Maura Healey commissioned a study to look at this question, and essentially said, what is the cheapest way to solve this problem? And essentially, we could build more pipeline. We could contract for LNG on a firm basis to ensure that we have enough liquefied natural gas to make it through any winter. We could invest in energy efficiency and demand response. We could invest in energy efficiency and firm imports via existing transmission. A fun fact, our existing transmission lines up to Canada do not have a requirement that power be delivered on the highest peak days in the winter, because Hydro-Quebec is a winter peaking system, and so they are not excited to sign up for being on the hook for those peak winter days. Or we can invest in new transmission via something like the Northern Pass or the power line through Maine. The cheapest of those options was to invest in energy efficiency and demand response, which I think will surprise, at least it doesn't surprise Don. But somehow that discussion has sort of fallen by the wayside. And this is just another way to look at it, both on the term with the view of greenhouse gas emissions and savings to ratepayers. We would save more greenhouse gases by creating new transmission to Quebec, but maximum savings to ratepayers come from investing locally in demand response and energy efficiency. And one of the fun things that I sort of have circled around and around on this, how could we have avoided getting ourselves into this particular rat's nest of a infrastructure and geopolitical problem? I'm hesitant to say that if we had invested massively in wind and solar in the 2010 timeframe, that our rates actually would be dramatically lower than they are now. One of the things that I have pointed out recently is that Cape Wind, while you may have supported that project, the contract for Cape Wind was somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 cents a kilowatt hour. So it was, if we had invested in that time frame, that those were still early stage technologies, and we might have wanted to do it for other reasons other than saving ratepayers money. But it is not clear to me that making that bet at that time would have resulted in lower electric rates than we have now. But it is definitely the case that if we as a region had started becoming much more energy efficient 2 or 3 decades ago, we would have taken a lot of the edge off of the pain that everyone is now experiencing. So that's my spiel. Happy to take questions probably at the end of Don's spiel. And I'd also like to take a quick moment to promote one of our upcoming webinars that I think people here might be interested in, and you can find at our website.
Thanks, Sam. That was very informative. And I do have a story from 1995, shows how old I am, when I was sitting in a management meeting at the old New England Electric System. And our CEO at the time, John Rowe, was talking about this new idea of deregulating the electric utility industry. And to me, it was a terrible idea because I'd grown up operating coal-fired power plants as an environmental engineer. But I said to John, how are we going to guarantee that there's going to be enough generation? He said, quote unquote, the market will provide. And he's all retired, has his millions of dollars of retirement pay, and he's long gone. And we're stuck with this particular paradigm. So thanks, Sam. I'd like to now turn to Don Kreis. Don, what would you like to tell us tonight?
Well, the first thing I want to say, since Sam asked about my Maine days, is that I remember John Rowe when he was CEO of Central Maine Power back in the day when that was a scrappy and well-regarded independent investor-owned utility. And they were the lead owner of the Maine Yankee nuclear power plant. And there was a big controversy about whether to try to shut that plant down or not. And of course, that is long gone. But what people really should remember John Rowe for is something he said when he was CEO of Exelon, which is talking about how to get utilities to do stuff that you want them to do. He said, and I quote, "The rat has to smell the cheese."
Absolutely.
I translated that aphorism into Latin, and I have it somewhere in my computer because I'm a lawyer. And if you translate really prosaic things into Latin, they sound very lofty and highfalutin. So I deploy that every so often. And if it was just me saying that, it would be pretty crude. But coming out of the mouth of a super successful utility CEO who, had ran successively bigger and bigger utility empires, it's just a classic example of a irrefutable truth about the way investor-owned utilities are and what they do or can do for us. Sam really did a fabulous job of covering all the relevant territory, and I don't have any slides to share with you, in part because I read The Cognitive Style of PowerPoint by Edward R. Tufte, which you all should read if you haven't looked at it. I'm happy to say, though, that Sam's slide deck was consistent with the principles that Edward R. Tufte articulates, which is he thinks that slides are best used to provide illustrations of things rather than as a kind of a speech outline. So, but I try to avoid slides when I can. And since I am the state's ratepayer advocate, and my job is to represent the interests of residential utility customers, and because I'm a contrarian who likes to cause trouble and even get myself in trouble, I guess that when the question is, why have our rates become so high, I am tempted to say the question we all should really be asking, and this was pretty implicit in what Sam had to say, the question we all should really be asking is, well, why were our rates so low for so long? Because we went through a solid decade in which the global and regional price of natural gas was very, very low for a bunch of reasons. And since, as my friend John Rowe would say, the markets will provide, what the markets provided was incentives for people to come and build natural gas power plants because the fuel was cheap and there was money to be made in these newly deregulated or restructured wholesale electric markets. So there was this huge rush to build these things all over the region. And of course, Sam showed you the slide that ably documents that trend. And what we knew then is the same thing we know now. Natural gas is a global commodity that has a very volatile price. And there's a boom and bust cycle as firms that look for new sources of natural gas stop doing that when the price gets really low because they have no economic incentive to do that. And as a result, the price comes back up. And so we had a confluence of really bad stuff happen last year and this year in the form of a relative dearth of supply of natural gas, a lack of exploration for new natural gas supplies, a global uptick in demand, some bad weather, that meant that not a lot of natural gas went into storage over the summer. And then, of course, there's the invasion of Ukraine, which caused a massive disruption in the worldwide movement of natural gas from where it's produced to where it's consumed, especially in Europe. And so as a result of that, natural gas futures shot through the roof. And that is how we get to a scenario where some of us in very short order, I think on December 1, are going to be paying something like 26 or 27 cents for their electricity without even taking into account the charges that they pay for the distribution network and that sort of thing. And of course, there have been similar upticks in the price that people pay for natural gas if they're served by Unitil and Liberty. It is interesting, though, that in the last few weeks, there's been another trough in natural gas prices. I mean, in part because we're in a shoulder season when demand is relatively low. But, you know, again, the price can and will come down. The prices that we're paying now for default energy service from our utilities are all based on prognostications that were made over the last few months by suppliers about what their costs would be over the coming winter. And I've seen futures prices for the month of January in particular that would make your that would just make you want to put your head in your hands and just cry into your keyboard, as I seem to be doing regularly. So in terms of, I guess I don't think it's productive to, for me, as a resolutely nonpartisan actor, to sit around and worry about what we should have done but didn't do so that we wouldn't be in this pickle. I agree with Sam that there's probably not anything we could have done that would have landed us in a significantly different place than the place that we are in now. How do I know that? Well, in part because I think our friends to the south in Massachusetts, they have, I guess from the perspective of most people here, a more evolved set of public policy initiatives when it comes to energy and electricity. And yet, you know, they're essentially in the same or as bad a spot as we are. So the relevant question isn't really who to blame for how we got here. The relevant question for me is, what do we do now? Now, I will say, as a nonpartisan actor, that I have to remind myself all the time that partisan politics does play a legitimate role in our lives and in our community. And so I don't intend to criticize anybody in the political realm for sitting around and arguing or standing around and arguing about what we should have or could have or might have done that we could have or should have done differently. That's fine. And if it informs your vote, that's probably okay. I just don't spend a lot of time worrying about it in my work, because I'm just looking ahead and trying to figure out what we ought to do now. One thing that I think, one big mistake that New Hampshire made fairly recently is in turning the big boat of ratepayer funded energy efficiency around. And it didn't get turned all the way around. It's a little bit like that big container ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. I think it was last year, if you remember when that happened. That's kind of what we did with energy efficiency, right? Like about a year ago, the Public Utilities Commission put out an order that basically said, we're backing out of ratepayer funded energy efficiency, and we're going to let the market determine how much energy efficiency people buy. Because if it's such a great idea, people should just be buying it themselves. And the PUC decided that, and we filed an appeal of the PUC's decision, and Clean Energy New Hampshire did the same, and 2 or 3 other parties, the utilities even appealed that. And that those appeals were all withdrawn because the legislature adopted and the governor signed House Bill 549 last February. Well, House Bill 549 is the reason that the Exxon Valdez or the whatever the name of the container ship is kind of wedged in the Suez Canal now, because it enshrined energy efficiency, ratepayer funded energy efficiency in statute, but it kind of stuck it in a bad place. And so we are not buying enough energy efficiency, and we are in some ways constraining the utilities that deliver those programs in a way that isn't helpful. What we really need if the question is, well, what legislation would you propose, Don? I guess at the top of my agenda would be a bill that enshrines an energy efficiency resource standard in New Hampshire law. So what's an energy efficiency resource standard? Well, that is a public policy that says that we are going to use ratepayer money to buy all cost-effective energy efficiency. Because we know that the negawatt with an N is cheaper than the megawatt with an M when it comes to how to meet that next unit of demand for energy, not out to infinity by any means, because there actually is a point at which supply side options actually do become less expensive than the next unit of energy efficiency. But we are so far away from that point that I literally can't see it on the horizon. It really is over the horizon and on some other part of the planet. And I don't think we'll ever get there because technology keeps evolving. And, technologies are always on that learning curve so that things that we invent become cheaper with time, at least things that can be mass produced like PV panels and LED light bulbs and that kind of thing. So I think there are always going to be innovative ways of using less energy to use the same, to accomplish the same amount of work. And what we need to do is put the thumb on the scale so that people invest in those technologies. And as long as we are careful to do that in a way that saves money for everybody, it's a total win-win solution. And the key, I think, is applying a rigorous cost-benefit screen. We do that. We spent a lot of time here in New Hampshire developing a cost-benefit screen that's uniquely tailored to the public policy of our state. And the problem that we have is that I think that in its heart of hearts, our Public Utilities Commission think that energy efficiency is basically an imaginary friend to people like me. Like they think I'm running around saying that we should collect this money from ratepayers and then spend it on energy efficiency just because I like the people that run around insulating houses, and that it really doesn't yield any significant benefits that we wouldn't achieve if we didn't spend that money. And there's nothing wrong with that, except those people are wrong. And, we have the data to prove that they're wrong. But in order for it to be persuasive, people have to actually believe the evidence that we put in front of them. And that doesn't happen in some quarters. So that's, the hill I die on is energy efficiency. The next hill I'm going to die on has to do with democratizing the way that our utilities plan our future. I want to completely rewrite our least cost integrated resource planning statute so that stakeholders get a seat at the table as the utilities are deciding what their options and priorities are. And I want to do that. I want to force them to do that in a manner that is both least cost and advances the public policy that our legislature has enshrined in statute. That it is pretty much exactly what you would want the legislature to be telling utilities to do, which is basically safe and reliable service at a low cost, but with attentiveness to health impacts, environmental impacts, and we want to maximize energy efficiency, and we want to make sure that the state thrives as an economy, and we want to make sure everything is fair. Well, the statute says that. The PUC has been refusing to enforce it, and so I want to go to the legislature next term and get the legislature to fine-tune the statute so that even the PUC can't ignore what has been delivered to it in the form of really explicit and unassailably clear instructions from the legislature. Something Sam mentioned at various junctures kind of intermittently is a question that I actually think is central to my concerns as a ratepayer advocate. And it has to do with reforming the empire that Sam's friend Gordon Van Wheely runs. Our regional transmission organization, ISO New England, has a really important job and exercises certain authority that restructuring the states used to exercise. So it's their job to keep the lights on. That's resource adequacy. That's a state responsibility. But now the states have delegated that responsibility to ISO New England. ISO New England was formed with the approval of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission But the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission didn't have the fortitude or the confidence to tell the transmission owners and the generation owners that they had to turn over operational control to these regional transmission organizations. So instead, the FERC just asked everybody to do that. And in some regions of the country, the answer was hell no. So there are no RTOs in the Southeast and in a big swath of the Mountain West. We have one here in New England, but the terms and conditions of it are so favorable to the legacy interests that the deck is stacked. And I think the deck is stacked against ratepayers, the deck is stacked against new technologies, and the deck is stacked against openness and accountability. And we need massive reform to the way the ISO is governed and the way that it holds itself accountable. You know, if Gordon Van Wheely were here today, he would give you a big speech about how technology neutral they are, but there's no such thing as technology neutrality. If you profess technology neutrality, what you're really saying is, I like the mix that we have now. The other thing I'd like to say is that some people think that the answer to this crisis that is brought about by over-reliance on natural gas as a technology to make electricity is to build more pipelines so that we get even more natural gas and therefore become even more reliant on natural gas as the dominant technology for producing electricity. And I can't bring myself to go there. That is, I think, by some terms, a definition of insanity. And so what we really need is public policy that brings more diversity to our energy mix, just as a way of hedging our bets. A couple of other things I would say is we need to take a hard look, and in fact, the PUC, to its credit, is taking a hard look on the way our electric distribution companies procure their default energy service. Right now, they're putting out an request for proposals every 6 months, and they get bids that are based on whatever happens to be happening in the wholesale market at the time. And if you hit the market on the wrong day, you get really high bids. And that is kind of what has happened here in New Hampshire. And so there's a huge delta between the default energy service price that the electric co-op is charging right now of about 17 cents and what Unitil is about to start charging of about 26 cents. So, you know, we really need to rethink that procurement process. And lately, my favorite idea is to hold a live descending clock auction at which all the utilities are participating at the same time and all the suppliers are participating at the same time. And I think that's going to reduce some of the risk premium that's getting built into the prices that everybody's paying for default energy service. Another point, everybody should stop taking default energy service. 2023 is not going to be the year of biomass. It's actually going to be the year of community power aggregation, so that every municipality in the state has an opportunity to become the electricity provider for everybody in town who doesn't opt out. I think that has a lot of potential. And we need to take a look at our runaway transmission costs in New England. We have the highest transmission costs in the country. And while transmission planning, as conducted by ISO New England, is subject to some oversight by FERC and others, the actual execution of these transmission projects and the actual operation and maintenance of the transmission system are going on essentially without supervision. And again, with apologies to my friend John Rowe, even he would admit that when you tell a utility it can do whatever it wants without any supervision or oversight, it is going to act in a way that maximizes return on for shareholders and minimizes benefits to customers while driving up the costs that they incur. Okay, how was that?
Don, I'm impressed. Great coverage of the waterfront. At this point, we've got some time to take some questions from our audience. And I'd like to, Susan or Donna, do you have someone that you could pick out to offer for the first question?
We've just started getting a spate of more political questions. So why don't I start with Barb, who had a question about if there were a new governor, what could be accomplished?
And also, would that affect the people on the PUC commission, I believe?
Yeah, yeah. So Barb, you want to ask your question out loud? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. That was the question. I just wondered how the people on the PUC get appointed, and if we change administration, can we replace the people on the PUC? But Sam kind of addressed that in the chat. I don't know if other people saw that.
I can say that out loud, and actually Don probably knows better than I do the exact length of Carlton Simpson's term that he's serving out to finish out Diane Martin's term. Is it the end of this year, Don, or the end of next year?
It's actually neither of those things. I believe Carlton's term expires in next summer, in round about June or July of next summer. The way this is supposed to work is that the PUC has 3 commissioners. They serve 6-year terms, and every 2 years, the governor gets to appoint or reappoint a commissioner. And we got completely out of whack because of resignations and other screwball things that happened. And we're now back on track. And unfortunately for my friend, Commissioner Simpson, he sort of drew the short straw in that he got the really short term. So he would need to be renominated by the governor and reconfirmed by the executive council next summer in order to serve a full 6-year term. And then after him, I think the next term that expires 2 years after that is Chairman Goldner. And then 2 years after that is Commissioner Chattopadhyay. Whose name I can pronounce correctly, by the way, unlike most people.
Thanks, Don.
Because he used to work for me.
Why don't we, I'd like to turn to Jennifer and Sarah Smith. There's a good question there about heat pumps. So is it Jennifer or Sarah could come on and verbalize the question? And
Sure. I was just wondering, our son in New York City was actually paid by the utilities to put in a heat pump. My heat pumps cost me a good bit, although I got some rebate from New Hampshire Saves. And I was just wondering, there's a lot of people who just can't afford to put in heat pumps. It could massively reduce our dependence on oil and gas for heating. Would a program like that be feasible if we could develop the political will?
Well, so I'm confused by your question, because you said your son got paid to put in a heat pump and you said you got a rebate. So isn't that the same thing?
Yeah, but I didn't get very much for it. He actually got paid to put it in. He did not pay a cent for it.
$6,000 they gave him.
And they're actually, I think in Massachusetts, they're even better, those rebates. And also it's worth pointing out that in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's, I believe it's called the Homes section of the Inflation Reduction Act that encourages state energy offices to take $4.3 or $4.6 billion worth of money that's dispersed based on a formula to all the states and use that for rebates for electrification of particularly of residential, but also essentially any heating appliance. However, the state energy offices get to decide how they are going to disperse that money. They need to put in a proposal to the federal government. As long as that proposal is copacetic with the guidance that the federal government puts out, the state will be allowed to determine how that money is spent. The sort of model rule that was part of the IRA suggested that there could be as much as an $8,000 rebate for the installation of a heat pump in a residential property. But I think it's very unlikely that New Hampshire's Department of Energy will take that model document and reproduce it verbatim at the state level. I will also say that it is, in my opinion, a very actionable thing for everyone here to reach out to Jared Chicoine and Chris Elms at the Department of Energy and let them know that they should go after that free money for the state of New Hampshire to invest in energy efficiency and electrification. That said, heat pumps, I think, can save a lot of money for you particularly if you're heating with oil or propane currently. And also if you can additionally afford to invest in net metered residential solar, rates are quite favorable for doing that right now. But it is a huge capital expense, and I think it's, it behooves everybody here to just remember that there are a lot of people who do not have access to that type of capital, and there are a lot of people who are renters, and the rental problem is a really big deal. Like the split incentives of a landlord and a tenant is a serious problem that, in my opinion, is going to require a policy solution.
So what I would add to that is that if the objective is to get people to switch from using fuels like fuel oil and instead install a heat pump and save a pile of money on fuel oil costs, that is exactly what the PUC has told the utilities they have to stop doing. And they've done that. They got part of the way to that through some bad language in House Bill 549, and the PUC has adopted a very regrettable interpretation of the language in House Bill 549. And so if anything, you can look forward to the utilities bailing out of home initiatives whose purpose is to get people to use less fuel oil and rely more on electricity. That's a big problem that we're going to try and fix in the upcoming legislature.
Great. I'd like to tap Bruce Burke of Pittsfield to talk about the recent DOE report on the cost of solar energy and its benefits to the New Hampshire state. Bruce, can you come on?
Yeah, no, I put it in the chat, and I'd love to get some feedback on this. I thought that that the DOE had commissioned some consultant out of Canada to examine the potential for solar savings going forward and cost shifting. So cost shifting is the reason that the governor's been against increasing net metering, is because he thinks the cost will just be shifted to people who don't have solar or lower middle income. And this report said that that was an insignificant cost and that we would actually save significant amounts on distributive costs by going to solar. So I'm just a lay person trying to understand. Gentlemen, you want to educate us on that?
Rock, paper, scissors for this one, Tom?
Well, that actually was a pretty decent summary, I think. The Department of Energy, it was originally supposed to be the PUC, but then we created a Department of Energy, so the job kind of got delegated to them. Was told to conduct a VDER study. VDER stands for Value of Distributed Energy Resources. And the idea is to determine how close we came to getting it right when we created a new formula for compensating net metering back in 2017. And so we haven't actually received that study yet, but the firm up in Canada that did the study, Dunsky, released, I guess, a preliminary version of it, and there was a big public meeting about it. And lo and behold, it revealed that we more or less got it right in terms of what the right compensation is for net metering. And as you just pointed out, the amount of cost shifting is actually quite low. I think the study found that if we just leave things the way they are in terms of the way we compensate net metering, there will, over between now and 2035, people who do net meter will see their bills go down by 92.3%, and people who don't net meter will see their bills go up 1% higher than they otherwise would have been. That's a small amount of cost shifting, and it is important to keep in mind that the law doesn't say no cost shifting, right? We subsidize each other all the time. Your utility does not do an individualized cost of service study for every single customer so that you do not cross-subsidize any of your neighbors. We do it all the time. So it's built into the system. And so that small amount of cost shifting is arguably not an unreasonable amount. And so that I think bodes well for the future of net metering. I used to run around and say, the secret to my success as consumer advocate is avoid all public discussion of net metering. And I've abandoned that posture, and I'm now leaning into the conversation. And it is because I was pleasantly surprised by what that study seems to be suggesting.
Can I
What do you
also,
think, Sam?
can I follow further up on that? Sam, can you also talk about what the study left out in terms of the advantages of solar energy?
Well, so I'm not, you might be alluding to something. I'm going to say something different for starters, which is, I so my organization, it has, net metering has been a sort of a signature policy for my organization for years. Is one we have defended, we have worked to expand, that we have, we've become so tied to that policy that it's really actually kind of difficult to separate us from it. But despite that history, I just want to remind everyone here what I said before, which is that the folks on this call may or may not be able to invest in their own residential solar. And that is a tool that is available to homeowners who have a good roof, who have a good site, who have, again, like the capital to invest or the ability to sort of pay down a loan, whatever arrangement you settle on. But the key problem with residential solar as the solution that we point everyone towards is that it is actually a fairly, depending on how you look at the numbers, it is usually less than half of the population that is in a position to benefit from that technology. So yes, like please do invest in it. It is a killer. Like the return on investment for residential solar is killer, and the current price environment makes it even better. But just all of us need to remember that there's a certain tone deafness when we go out into the world and say, well, the solution is everyone should just put solar on their roof. So just remember that there's a bit of caution.
Speaking of tone deafness, my phone has been ringing off the hook over the last couple of weeks about Eversource. Now, that's a company that runs around telling you how much it loves its customers, but their interconnection process with regard to new solar net metered arrays for residential customers is super, super backlogged, to the point where people are putting in these solar arrays on their roofs or in their backyards. They send the note to Eversource saying, yep, ready to go. All you have to do is sign off on it. And then nothing happens. Last I checked, they were still working on final applications that they were getting back in August. That's outrageous that people are just like staring at their idle PV panels on their roof while Eversource is charging them, 22, 23 cents for default energy. Like, that really bugs me.
Okay, Don and Sam, we have to, our hour has come to an end.
Wow.
We have, I think, only scratched the surface. We could probably spend many more hours discussing a lot more issues that would come up. I would offer to Sam and Don, do you have any parting thoughts or thinking for us before we?
Excuse me, I have a question.
Who's this?
This is Al Rosso. I've listened to this since the beginning. I've looked at ISO's charts, and there's a little sliver there. It's called something to do with building plants from the nuclear point of view. I haven't heard a word about it, not a single word. And if we know about anything about history, it helps us to look back and see what's happened. And maybe even if we spoke German a little bit, we'd learn a little bit about that type of thing. How come we don't talk about that?
I'm happy to field that question, Don. I don't know if you were chomping at the bit there. I think the certainly now is not the time to shut down existing nuclear plants, and I think that's a fairly vanilla opinion in this. In the energy space, but there are only 2 left in New England that one theoretically could shut down, and I would argue they're not actually at risk of being shut down. But then the real impediment to building nuclear right now is not the anti-nuclear movement; it is the cost of nuclear. And I would encourage you to look at what's happening in Georgia, where the one nuclear power plant under construction in the United States is under construction, and has seen over a 500% construction price overrun, which the ratepayers of Georgia are already paying for, even though the plant is not fully operational as of yet. So the cost is actually the main impediment to nuclear. And so I actually chafe a little bit when people say, power prices are so high, let's solve it by building nuclear, because nuclear has benefits, but that does not currently appear to be one of them.
So I just want to say, because I get a lot of people asking me like, well, why aren't we able to take advantage of Seabrook and its cheap nuclear power? And the answer is that we are. Like, I just fired up my ISO New England app. Right now, we have 2 nuclear power plants in New England, Seabrook and Millstone. They are both chugging away at close to full capacity, but the marginal unit that's setting the price of wholesale energy is a natural gas unit. And Seabrook, the company that owns Seabrook, NextEra, that's the price they're getting, the price that is set by that marginal natural gas unit. So yes, we should not run around and shut down nuclear plants that are still safe and operational and able to produce relatively carbon-free and relatively cheap energy. The cost of building new nuclear plants is not reasonable at present, but nobody's talking about shutting down Millstone or Seabrook. That's part of the solution at this point.
Thank you. Also note that the CEO of Southern Company that's building that Vogtle nuclear plant basically has lost his job because of the overruns. So it's dangerous territory for CEOs embarking on building new nuclear power plants. But folks, we have obviously too many questions, so many questions we can't answer tonight or actually pose tonight, but it tells me that we probably, because of this subject, we should schedule another meeting of a similar nature sometime in the near future to continue this conversation. But we are running out of time, and I would ask Sam and Don, do you have any last minute thoughts for us before we close out? And it's okay if,
Thank you.
go ahead.
No, I have nothing. I have nothing more to add.
Okay,
Well,
Don?
I just want to thank all of you for your thoughtful questions. And I want to say that the network that convened us has become a really important part of the energy firmament in New Hampshire. It is such a useful way for all of us to be in communication with each other and share insights and dispel rumors and call people to action on short notice when necessary. So I'm really glad to have been included in it, and I will continue to participate as long as I'm invited.
Great, Don. And thank you for all your support, both you and Sam, for the support of the New Hampshire network. Hopefully next time we can get together and talk about some of the more prospective issues in energy, such as transactive energy. And maybe people like to hear about that. But we are running out of time. We're well beyond our time, but I think well spent. I do want to thank the folks who helped put this meeting together, who is Reimar Seidler, Susan Richmond, Donna Reardon, and John Gage. Thank you to those four people for putting together the Zoom meeting, doing the advertising, the marketing, which obviously is very successful. I saw we had a high of 98 people this evening, which is pretty phenomenal for a Zoom meeting. And thanks all of you who signed in tonight. I think hopefully this has been useful for you. Maybe it's brought some more questions to your mind. And if you're interested in doing this again, please let the New Hampshire Network know, and we'll schedule something for the near future to continue this conversation. So at this point, I'm going to close out and thank everyone for being here tonight, and to have a good evening. Good night.